Fantastic. You're a graduate of St. Agnes All Boys Catholic High School, isn't that right? Fantastic.
Cheech and Chong built their legacy on outrageous comedy and counterculture cool, but not everything about their rise to fame was peace, love, and laughs. Some facts have been brushed aside, buried deep, or quietly ignored by the people behind the scenes. And once you learn why, it all starts to make sense. Join us as we dig into the facts that Cheech and Chong's producers tried to hide from the public. Born in a strip club, Cheech Marin, born Richard Anthony Marin, grew up in South Los Angeles. His father was a police officer, so Cheech knew what discipline looked like early on. But even as a kid, Cheech had a creative side. He didn't want to follow in his father's footsteps. Instead, he found interest in art, especially pottery. Cheech attended California State University, Northridge, where he studied ceramics and developed his artistic skills. But the world was changing fast. The Vietnam War was at its peak, and many young men were being drafted to serve. Cheech, like thousands of others, didn't want to go to war. He famously said, "I didn't want to get killed in Vietnam." So Cheech made a bold choice. He left the US and moved to Canada to avoid the draft. That decision would change his life forever. Cheech landed in Vancouver with hopes of living freely and continuing his art. But life wasn't easy. He had to take whatever jobs he could find just to get by. He worked as a truck driver. He unloaded carpets. All the while, he kept up with his ceramics, trying to stay connected to the creative world. Tommy Chong's story is quite different. Born in Edmonton, Alberta, Tommy had a mixed heritage. His father was Chinese and his mother was of Scottish and Irish descent. He was a natural performer from a young age and had a strong love for music. Tommy played guitar in a rhythm and blues band called Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers. The group was good enough to get signed by Motown Records. They even performed with major artists, and Tommy tasted real success. But eventually, he started drifting away from music. He moved back to Canada and opened a burlesque club in Vancouver called the Shanghai Junk. But this wasn't just any club. It had dancers, yes, some topless, but it also featured sketch comedy, live acts, and improv. It was part nightclub, part theater, and completely unique. Tommy was always experimenting, and the club became a testing ground for his creativity. Out of this club, he formed a comedy sketch group called City Works. The idea was simple: gather a few people, write some funny scenes, and make people laugh. He didn't know it yet, but this group would become the launching pad for something big. One day, Cheech Marin walked into the Shanghai Junk. He was looking for work, maybe backstage, maybe something creative, anything to get involved. Tommy took one look at Cheech and saw something special. Cheech had a quick wit, a smart sense of humor, and a relaxed way of talking that stood out. Tommy invited Cheech to join City Works, and the two started working together almost immediately. They began performing sketches as part of the club's shows. It was casual, fun, and creative. The two had something that was hard to describe. Their timing just worked. They bounced off each other naturally. The audience could feel it too. Soon they were doing scenes together more and more. One night, while rehearsing, they started messing around with an idea. Tommy played a guy trying to get into an apartment. Cheech was inside. They didn't write it out. They just improvised. It was simple, but it was hilarious. The timing, the confusion, the delivery, the audience went wild. That sketch, now known as Dave's Not Here, became their first hit. It showed something important. Cheech and Chong had real chemistry. They didn't need fancy sets or deep stories. They just needed each other, a microphone, and a simple idea. Their back-and-forth dialogue had rhythm and charm. It was relatable, funny, and different from anything else at the time. After the success of Dave's Not Here, Cheech and Tommy realized they had something worth exploring. They left the Shanghai Junk and started touring as a comedy duo. They performed at small clubs, colleges, and underground theaters. Word started to spread. Soon they were calling themselves Cheech and Chong, and they began recording comedy albums. Their voices, full of personality and slang, became instantly recognizable. Their sketches touched on topics like stoners, hippies, immigration, and police, always with humor and a twist of satire. The Bong Bust. In the early 2000s, the U.S. government launched a nationwide investigation called Operation Pipe Dreams. The goal was to crack down on companies selling drug paraphernalia, mostly glass pipes and bongs used to smoke marijuana. While marijuana use was still illegal at the federal level, glass pipes and bongs sat in a legal gray area. Many shops and websites sold them openly, but in some states even selling the equipment was against the law. The operation involved the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, and U.S. attorneys from multiple states. It targeted over 50 companies and individuals across the country. Most were small business owners, glassblowers, or online sellers. Tommy Chong got caught up in this because of his connection to Nice Dreams Enterprises, a company run by his son, Paris Chong. The company sold glass bongs and pipes through a website called Chong Glass. Though Tommy wasn't managing day-to-day operations, he was closely tied to the brand. He appeared in ads, lent his name, and helped promote the products. What caused the legal trouble was a shipment of bongs that went to Pennsylvania, a state that had tough laws banning the sale of drug paraphernalia. That delivery triggered federal charges, and Chong quickly became the most high-profile target of the entire operation. In 2003, federal agents arrested Tommy Chong and charged him with conspiracy to distribute drug paraphernalia. This wasn't about drug use, but about promoting and selling products the government argued were made for illegal drug consumption. Although Tommy wasn't personally packing or shipping any boxes, prosecutors pointed out that his face and name were all over the products and the website. To them, that was enough to link him to the business and the crime. What made this case stand out was how clearly Tommy Chong was singled out. In interviews, even the prosecutors admitted that Chong was chosen because of his fame. He had spent decades building a comedy brand around stoner culture. His movies, records, and stand-up acts celebrated marijuana use, and that made him the perfect person for the government to make an example out of. Prosecutors believed his public image had influenced drug culture in a major way. So even though other people involved in the case faced lesser charges or no prison time at all, Chong's sentence would be different. When the case reached court, Tommy pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. As part of a plea deal, he hoped for a reduced sentence. He also took responsibility and expressed regret. He told the judge he didn't want to be seen as encouraging illegal behavior, especially to young fans. Still, the sentence was harsh compared to what others received. The court gave Tommy 9 months in federal prison, a $20,000 fine, and 100 hours of community service. The judge made it clear that Chong was being punished in part because of who he was. His public role as a marijuana icon made him more visible, and in the eyes of the government more dangerous as a symbol. Many people, including fans and critics, saw this punishment as over the top. It didn't seem to fit the crime, especially since Tommy wasn't directly managing the business. But the message from the government was loud and clear. Even celebrities would be held accountable. Tommy served his sentence at Taft Correctional Institution, a low-security federal prison in California. It wasn't a high-security facility with violent inmates. Most of the people there were white-collar offenders, people who had committed financial crimes, tax fraud, or drug-related offenses. Surprisingly, Tommy described his time there as almost peaceful. He said it felt more like an adult summer camp than a dangerous prison. He spent most of his days reading, writing, playing cards, and talking with other inmates. One of the people he met was Jordan Belfort, who would later become famous as the Wolf of Wall Street. At the time, Belfort was serving time for stock fraud and money laundering. According to Chong, he actually encouraged Belfort to write down his story. That advice eventually turned into a best-selling book and the hit movie The Wolf of Wall Street. Tommy also used his time in prison to reflect and to write. He kept a journal and began thinking about how he could use the experience in his future stand-up shows and interviews. Tommy Chong was released in July 2004 after serving his full sentence. By that time, the public had already picked sides. Many people believed the punishment had more to do with who he was than what he did. They argued it was unfair to treat a comedian and actor more harshly just because he had built a career making jokes about weed. Fans rallied behind him, and even some legal experts questioned whether Operation Pipe Dreams had been the best use of government resources. For Tommy, the experience gave him a new voice, After his release, he became more vocal than ever about the need for marijuana legalization and criminal justice reform. He talked openly about his time in prison and criticized how nonviolent drug offenders were treated in the justice system. He wrote about it all in his 2006 book, The I Chong, Meditations from the Joint. In it, he shared his reflections, detailed his prison experiences, and poked fun at the irony of a comedian being locked up for selling glassware. Comedy's ugliest breakup. Cheech and Chong were comedy legends. Their movies and sketches made millions of people laugh, and their on-stage chemistry felt effortless. But behind the scenes, things were very different. Off-stage, their partnership was full of tension, arguments, and power struggles. They were not the best friends many fans thought they were. In fact, they often fought like brothers. Even when they were at the height of their fame, their relationship was shaky. They still worked well on stage, but behind closed doors, things were falling apart. Cheech Marin once said, "We're brothers, we're not best friends." That one sentence explains a lot. They were close, but not in a friendly, easygoing way. It was more like a sibling relationship, full of love but also filled with frustration, competition, and conflict. Backstage fights were common. They argued about writing, directing, tone, characters, and almost everything. But they always pulled it together when it came time to perform. No matter how big the argument, they could walk on stage minutes later and give the audience a flawless show. That's how strong their chemistry was. They knew how to play off each other perfectly, even if they were angry just before. Cheech once compared their bond to a pearl forming from irritation. In other words, their creative tension was part of what made their work so sharp and original. But over time, that irritation started to take over the relationship. As their careers grew, so did the cracks in their partnership. Cheech began to feel sidelined. Even though both were credited as writers on their albums and films, Tommy Chong started to take more control, especially when it came to their movies. By the time they were filming Nice Dreams in 1981, things had started to change for the worse. That movie, their third major film, marked a turning point in their partnership. Cheech began to feel that Chong was taking over everything. Chong wasn't just directing, he was writing, shaping the story, deciding the comedy style, and dictating the overall feel of the movie. It became clear that he wanted full creative control. Cheech felt more and more like a sidekick instead of an equal partner. For a duo that had once been completely in sync, this shift was painful. The more Chong tried to take charge, the more Cheech felt pushed out of his own work. He didn't want to just follow orders, he wanted to help shape the vision. The final blow came in 1985. Cheech pitched an idea for a new project called Born in East LA. It was a personal story for him, funny, culturally relevant, and very different from their usual stoner comedies. He wanted to try something new, something that showed his range as an actor and writer. He asked Chong to be part of it. Chong refused. He didn't like the direction Cheech wanted to take. He thought it strayed too far from the brand they had built together. It was the final sign that they were no longer on the same page. So, Cheech went ahead and made Born in East LA on his own. The film was a hit. It proved that Cheech could succeed without Chong and that his voice was strong enough to stand on its own. It was a turning point, not just in their careers, but in their lives. Chong later admitted, "I became a megalomaniac." He confessed that he wanted too much control and it pushed Cheech away. By then, though, the damage was done. The split was final. After they went their separate ways, Cheech and Chong each took different paths. Cheech explored acting in more mainstream movies and TV shows. He took roles in films like Tin Cup and appeared on hit shows like Nash Bridges. He showed a different side of himself, more serious, more versatile. The horror crossover. Most people know Cheech and Chong for their stoner comedies, movies like Up in Smoke and Nice Dreams, that mix weed jokes with wild characters and crazy situations. But what many fans don't know is that they were almost part of a horror movie, and not just any horror movie, but one from the Friday the 13th franchise. That's right. Cheech and Chong nearly crossed paths with Jason Voorhees, the hockey-masked killer of Camp Crystal Lake. This strange idea came from director Tom McLoughlin, the man behind Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. Tom McLoughlin had a lot of respect for horror, but he also loved comedy. After directing Jason Lives in 1986, a film that already added a little more humor to the franchise than usual, he started thinking about how to take things even further. At some point, McLaughlin came up with a wild idea: bring Cheech and Chong into the Friday the 13th universe. The concept he pitched was simple but funny. The movie would follow Cheech and Chong as either bumbling summer camp counselors or stoners running a weed farm in the woods, the same woods where Jason stalked his victims. Naturally, they'd have no clue what was going on around them, too high or distracted to realize the danger. As the story went on, they'd slowly start to notice people disappearing, but in typical Cheech and Chong fashion, they'd completely misread the situation and make things worse. Even though McLaughlin was excited about the idea, the studio wasn't. At the time, the Friday the 13th series had a very clear identity. It was about scares, suspense, and Jason Voorhees killing teenagers in the woods. The movies had started to bring in some humor, especially in Jason Lives, but they were still, at their core, slasher films. Bringing in two well-known comedy stars from a totally different genre was seen as too risky. The studio was afraid it would ruin the tone of the series or confuse the fans. Some executives probably worried that a movie like this would be laughed at, not because it was funny, but because it didn't take the horror seriously. So the pitch was never greenlit. It became one of those Hollywood what-if stories, an idea that made it into conversations but never onto the screen. Cheech and Chong never filmed a scene with Jason. The project was shelved, and the franchise continued in its usual bloody, serious style. Stolen from a cop. If you've seen Up in Smoke, you probably remember the license plate. It's one of the most famous little jokes in Cheech and Chong's comedy. A small but hilarious detail. The car that Cheech drives in the film, a lowrider Impala, has a California license plate that reads Muff DVR. It doesn't take long to figure out what it sounds like when you say it out loud. It's a classic stoner-style joke, dirty, funny, and hidden in plain sight. But what most fans don't know is this: the plate wasn't just made up for the movie, it was real. And the original owner? An off-duty cop? Yes, seriously. Back in the 1970s, personalized license plates, also called vanity plates, were just starting to become popular in California. Anyone could pay a little extra and put a word or short phrase on their car's plate, as long as it wasn't offensive. Apparently, it slipped through the cracks. Even more surprising, the person who registered the plate was an LAPD officer. According to people who followed the plate's history, the officer wasn't trying to make a statement. He just thought it was funny. In fact, he originally had it on an AMC Gremlin, not exactly a flashy car, but the plate definitely made it stand out. Over the years, the plate moved to other vehicles, including a Corvette and even a Volkswagen Bug. At some point, Cheech and Chong, or someone in their production crew, spotted the plate and decided it was perfect for the movie. Whether they asked for permission or just copied it is unclear, but the plate ended up on the now iconic lowrider Impala that Cheech drives in Up in Smoke. The plate became part of the film's humor, especially because the car gets pulled over by the police shortly after it appears. The officer who owned the real plate eventually retired in 1986, the same year that Up in Smoke was still enjoying cult status on VHS and late-night TV. But instead of turning in the plate, he kept it, along with its original California DMV registration stickers. To this day, it's considered a unique piece of California car culture history. Even though the plate is no longer on a registered vehicle, it's still intact and has been photographed a few times by collectors and movie memorabilia fans. Some people thought it was just a prop made for the film, but when they saw DMV records and old registration documents, they realized it had been real the whole time. It's a strange twist. One of the most famous dirty jokes in stoner movie history was actually born from a real police officer's license plate. The irony didn't go unnoticed, especially by fans who saw it as the ultimate inside joke. Jack Nicholson's dislocated shoulder. When Up in Smoke was getting ready to hit theaters, Cheech and Chong had no idea just how big of an impact it would have. But early signs were promising, especially when Hollywood royalty like Jack Nicholson showed up for a private screening. Nicholson was already a huge star by that time, known for roles in Easy Rider, Chinatown, and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So having him in the audience was a big deal. What made the moment even more memorable was the fact that Nicholson came to the screening with a dislocated shoulder. That's right, he was injured, in pain, and had been strongly warned not to laugh. His doctor had told him that laughing too hard could cause more damage or delay the healing process. But Jack didn't listen. Nicholson's injury wasn't some minor ache. A dislocated shoulder is painful, movements hurt, and sudden jolts like laughing can feel like electric shocks through your arm and chest. Before the screening began, he even joked that he'd try to hold it together. But then Up in Smoke started rolling. From the moment Cheech picks up Chong in the beat-up Impala, the laughs start coming. Nicholson tried to brace himself, but it was useless. As the film went on, he couldn't stop laughing. Every big gag, every ridiculous one-liner, and every over-the-top stoner scene had him groaning, wincing, and cracking up at the same time. People sitting near him could hear it, a mix of laughter and pain. He'd double over, then straighten up, trying not to move too much. Still, he never left. He stayed through the whole movie, reacting so loudly that others in the room took notice. His laughter, despite the pain, actually helped the filmmakers figure out which jokes hit hardest. Cheech Marin later said that Nicholson's reactions gave them confidence. If Jack Nicholson's laughing through that kind of pain, he said in interviews, then the movie must be doing something right. It became a kind of measuring stick. If a joke could make him laugh under those conditions, it was definitely funny. Nicholson wasn't just being polite. He genuinely loved the film's absurd and loose style, the way Cheech and Chong played off each other, and the way the movie never took itself seriously struck a chord with him. Even years later, he spoke fondly of that screening, calling the film hilarious and saying it had real balls for the time. There's one more surprising detail about Up in Smoke and Jack Nicholson. You might remember the beat-up yellow Volkswagen Beetle in the movie, the one that gets smashed, scratched, or pulled into crazy traffic scenes. That car wasn't some random prop from a studio lot. It was actually Jack Nicholson's personal car. He had loaned it to the production crew, either as a favor or because they needed a cheap beat-up car that wouldn't raise any eyebrows. Either way, it ended up on screen, adding to the real-world low-budget charm of the film. Some fans later recognized the car because Nicholson had been spotted driving it around Los Angeles in the early 70s. In a weird way, his presence was all over Up in Smoke, not just in the screening room, but in the film itself. It's a strange, funny chapter in the story of Cheech and Chong's rise, and it proves just how much their comedy could cut through, no matter the situation. And no script, no problem. When most people think of making a movie, they imagine long scripts, tons of rewrites, and pages filled with dialogue and stage directions. But for Cheech and Chong's 1981 hit Nice Dreams, that wasn't the case at all. In fact, their entire script was only 3.5 pages long. One of their most well-known movies, which ran over 80 minutes and featured a long list of wild scenes, only started with a few pages of writing. But there's a lot more to that story because behind that loose and chaotic style, there was actually a lot of planning and creative discipline. Before Nice Dreams became the movie we all know, it started as a completely different idea. Cheech and Chong first came up with the concept of two stoners working as landscapers in Los Angeles. Their plan? To plant marijuana in the gardens of fancy homes all across the city. They would secretly grow weed while trimming bushes and mowing lawns and then come back to harvest it later. That version was wild in its own right, but it eventually morphed into something even more out there. As the concept developed, the plot shifted into something much weirder. Instead of landscapers, Cheech and Chong became weed dealers using an ice cream truck as their mobile base. And not just any ice cream truck, this one had a giant clown head on top of it. In the movie, they drive the truck around LA, selling joints out of the back like frozen treats. It's absurd, cartoonish, and completely fitting for their brand of humor. The film follows them as they try to make enough money to retire, all while avoiding cops, angry buyers, and even a drug rehabilitation agent played by Stacy Keach. The film doesn't follow a traditional story arc. Instead, it feels like a bunch of crazy scenes stitched together by the main goal: make money and smoke as much weed as possible. With all that going on, it's hard to believe the original script was only 3.5 pages. But it's true. The screenplay didn't include full dialogue or detailed scene descriptions. Instead, it served more as a loose outline. It sketched out the main beats of the movie, the characters, the locations, and a few ideas for key scenes, but the rest was left open for improvisation. Cheech and Chong were known for working this way. They came from improv and sketch comedy backgrounds, and they liked to make things up on the spot. They trusted their chemistry and their instincts. For Nice Dreams, they didn't need every line written down. They just needed a basic structure, and then they could fill in the rest as they went. Even though the script was short and the style was loose, that doesn't mean the production was sloppy. In fact, a lot of work went into planning the visual gags and physical comedy. Many scenes were carefully storyboarded, meaning the filmmakers drew out every shot before filming, like a comic strip version of the movie. So while the script itself was incredibly short, the film still had structure. It just didn't rely on heavy dialogue or complex storytelling. It let the comedy lead the way. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next Hollywood story.